Hey, good morning. I think we're waiting for a couple more people to trickle in, but to be respectful of everybody's time, we will go ahead and get started with some introductions. It's great to see such a great crowd here for what we know is going to be a really, really interesting talk by Dr. Toni Torchia about the school-home connection and communicating with parents about bullying. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping things. For those who don't know me, my name's Amanda Nickerson. I'm the director of the Alberti Center. Just some housekeeping things. We are going to be taking virtual attendance via Zoom. So just make sure the name that you're using on Zoom matches with what we have on our registration list. If you need to change your name, you can just use the More button, the three buttons next to your name. And if you're watching with a group, just put all the names of those in attendance in the chat, if you will. We've got a lot of questions that came in even at registration, but feel free to also share any comments or questions either throughout the presentation at the end, and we will share those and ask those to Dr. Torchia. Bree Kishel will also be sharing a link in the chat for a brief evaluation to complete during the Q&A portion of the program. And that you will see a certificate of attendance that you can download on the final page of the evaluation. And that comes with NASP approved CPD credit. And we really love to get your feedback on the colloquium and ideas. We will also be sharing the slides on the Colloquium page of our website following the presentation today. So let's go ahead and move on to introducing Dr. Torchia. Dr. Torchia earned her doctoral degree in combined counseling and school psychology from our very own program at UB. She currently is the community programming specialist for the Alberti Center, and she provides student and educator-centered programming for schools and community agencies on topics like bullying and peer relationships. She also does our Dignity for All Students Act training, and we get such great feedback about that, and particularly this parent component. So we're really glad that she's going to be able to expand on that today. Additionally, if that's not enough, she also maintains a private practice as a counseling psychologist, working with individuals from age 10 through late adulthood on various mental health and adjustment concerns. She also has experience working as a school psychologist, serving as an assistant professor in the Master's in School Psychology program at Niagara University, and conducting research for many years at UB's Research Institute on Addictions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Torchia.
Thank you, Amanda. I really appreciate it. It's so nice to see so many people here today. I know it's gorgeous out, so it's a little tricky choosing whether to be in this session versus outside. So I appreciate those of you who are here and those of you who managed to do both. Congratulations. I'm just going to pull up my slides really quick here. Let's see. Bree, I just want to double check that I am able to share.
You're good.
Okay. Okay. So I do appreciate that introduction, Dr. Nickerson. So again, we're going to be focusing today on that school-home connection and particularly talking to parents about bullying. As Amanda mentioned, when I do the de-escalate trainings, I focus a lot on that part, and I'm happy to say we've gotten a lot of positive feedback to that. So we're bringing that to you today with a little bit of an expansion to it. But I hope you'll find this to be really practical and useful in terms of skills that you can bring into your schools. So we're going to focus on identifying those essential considerations for phone calls with parents and guardians regarding bullying, practicing some skills for handling those calls, potentially some negative responses from parents. I know that's always a concern. And then ways to improve collaborative problem solving and relationship building. Unless we're going to talk a little bit about how our personal feelings and biases can impact those conversations and even how we address bullying in general. So to get us started, Bree, I'm hopeful that you can pull up the whiteboard for us. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do, just so I can get a sense of what people's perspectives are in relation to working with parents, talking about bullying, is to ask everyone to answer this question that, sorry, I guess it got taken away. So when you think of working with parents in situations that involve bullying, what adjective might you use to describe the parent? For those of you who aren't familiar with the whiteboard function here on Zoom, if you go to the left side menu over here, you'll see that there's a text box option, so a T for text, and you can just type in whatever word you're thinking of. So whatever adjective you might use to describe a parent when talking about bullying situations. Don't worry if your words are overlapping. For those of you who like a lot of order, this is not going to be your favorite thing, but it gives us a chance to see some different things people are thinking. And if there's one that somebody else wrote down that really resonates with you, feel free to use the other tools, drawing tool even, to maybe make a circle around that, or find some other way to identify with that. So I'll let everybody do that. So I see concerned, nervous, upset, defensive, worried, potential shame, defensive, shocked, confused, difficult. Okay. Oh, a partner. In denial, concerned, worried. Okay, see lots and lots of circles around anxious and defensive and concerned. Okay. Okay. Wary. Yep. Okay, tense. All right. So it looks like we have lots of different ideas or perspectives on how we feel parents might approach a situation like this, or what we expect from parents, which is really common. I feel also it's pretty common that a lot of those tend to be fairly negative. And I'm sorry, right? Because that means that you're going into the situation potentially with your own set of emotions. So we're going to talk about some of that and finding some ways to manage some of those things and some of those reactions potentially from parents. So Bree, if you want to close that out, and I will go back to sharing. Okay. One second here. Let me just get back in here. Oh, we started over. That's okay. Okay, so as I mentioned, obviously wanting to get everyone's perspectives in terms of what we're thinking when we're beginning to work with parents. And to give you a little bit of background on this, when parents are interviewed, some of the research that we've looked at, or that I reviewed for this, when parents are addressing bullying situations in schools, there's a lot of different perspectives that they come into the situation with. And some examples of that would be school-related concerns. So parents are often identifying concerns related to lack of communication by the school itself. That often leads to distrust. Sometimes it's a self-fulfilling cycle, though, right? But distrust of the school by the parents, and then vice versa, parents by the school, and then lack of confidence in school policies. So those are obviously going to be some significant factors that are going to influence these conversations and these approaches to bullying situations. But then we're also looking at parent factors, right? So oftentimes some of those adjectives that you use to describe a parent, whether it be like tense, wary, defensive, all these things, can really be prompted by some of these ideas of, we want to be a good parent, right? We feel helpless when it comes to protecting our children when we send them off to school during the day. And so when we hear about situations involving bullying, that can lead to a lot of emotionality or reaction or responsiveness from a parent that sometimes is difficult for us as staff members to manage. So we want to think about those things and be sensitive to it. This next one, I just bring up this slide because one of the many questions that were asked during the sign-up process were, how do we deal with administrators or colleagues maybe who look at bullying as a rite of passage or something that's just going to happen and maybe something we don't want to address. So I just want to center us all in this definition of bullying. So when we talk about bullying, we are talking about these unwanted aggressive behaviors that are involving real or perceived power imbalances, and they're repeated over time. We're not talking about just standard teasing, being rude, conflict, or even mean behavior. I think centering ourselves around that definition, just sort of intellectually for ourselves, is really important, and having those conversations with administrators. There are a lot of behaviors that can kind of walk the line of bullying that I would consider very common, and things that we're going to see in schools, right? Even in households, right? Like my kids and I tease each other all the time, joke around with each other, right? We have conflicts with each other. Those are things that we have to learn to manage as individuals, right? But when we're talking about something that hits the level of bullying, we're talking about something different there. So we want to make sure we're recognizing that not all behaviors are bullying, and that when we are talking about something that reaches that point, we want to make sure we're really careful and conscientious about how we manage it, because we know there's a lot of consequences there. So when we think about these conversations with parents about bullying, and actually really any conversation we're having with someone, really identifying what the goal of that communication is really important, right? So when we're talking to parents about bullying, we want to make sure that this conversation is designed in a way that we're establishing a pattern of communication. It's not a one and done conversation that we're having. And we're not dictating to a parent, this is how this is going to be handled. We want to focus on that collaboration, that accountability, creating that support network for a parent and the family and just the school at large, essentially, in those moments. So we really want to be thoughtful about doing this in a way that is benefiting not just that very moment and getting us out of the phone call, but also the long-term relationships and overall school climate, essentially. So that leads us to the second one. So another goal is partnership between the school and the home, and focusing on immediate and long-term safety, as well as a positive school climate overall. I think when we address bullying situations in positive ways and really working together in this way, it can be a growth point rather than like a stagnancy or even a breaking off point between families and schools. So some key considerations for when you're speaking with a parent when it comes to bullying situations would be, I have a bunch here, and these are sort of the generalities, regardless of whether you're talking to a parent of an aggressor, a potential aggressor, or a victim, right? So when we're talking to a parent, identifying that there's a bullying situation happening. So within that, we want to think about one thing for sure, taking a moment to just check in with your own emotions before the meeting, if possible. So do a body scan, have a check-in with a colleague. Make sure you're coming at it from a point where you're not doing like 42 other things at the same time and dismissing the conversation because you're just not there for it, or that your own emotions aren't incredibly activated in that moment. I also think it's really important to have a plan for the meeting. So, considering whether or not it should be in person or by phone, what needs to be discussed. I've been in those conversations with parents where there's a lot of emotionality coming from the parent, and even sometimes from me, right? If it's a really tense situation, or if I'm having a really strong expectation that it's going to be a negative conversation, then I think it's especially important in those situations to have a plan. So what I recommend is having like a bullet point list of things that you want to make sure you cover in that discussion, because it can be really easy to get derailed or maybe put so much time and emphasis focusing on one particular part that we forget to address other factors. Another thing that I see happening a lot is what I like to call admiring the problem, where we just sit and focus only on what the issue is, and we don't stop to say, what can we do to help with this situation? So having a plan for that meeting to be able to identify, these are the key elements that I want to discuss in this. And then, kind of trying to, have a checklist for yourself to follow through on that is really important and really helpful. I think it also helps to build trust as well. right? So if I don't get through that conversation and say, for instance, I have to call a parent back, that might be something that can decrease their trust in our ability to handle the situation, right? If we're like, oh, I forgot this. Oh, I forgot this, right? Another thing is just the timing of those conversations can be really difficult. And so for my own planning purposes, if I can plan for one call that's covering everything that needs to be covered and is effective, that's way easier for me than having to have multiple phone calls or play phone tag with someone. So some considerations there. Another one is be timely, but have evidence. And I put them together, even though I feel like they are a little bit in contradiction of one another, right? So you don't want to tell a parent, by the way, your child was bullied about a week ago. I've been looking into it, and here's all these things, right? Instead, what you want to do is let a parent know right away. So I would often call a parent and say, listen, we have an evolving situation. I don't have all the evidence right now, but it's looking like there's some concerns with X or Y. I'd really wanted to just give you a heads up so you can check in with your child and see if they're okay. Maybe identify, have a conversation with them to gather some more information, but just so you know, we're continuing to gather and some understanding of this, right? But you do want to have some evidence of things to the extent that you can. So that idea of evidence is one thing to consider, is you can't always share the evidence, but you do want to have as good information or be willing to investigate as much as you can to be able to know what's going on. Expressing concern for the child feels like an obvious one to some of us, but I've been in situations where I've worked with teachers who are hesitant to do that, right? It almost feels to them like they're giving up something in that moment and they don't want to express concern, or they're concerned that by their own expression, that parent is then thinking like, oh, this is really bad. So finding a way to just say, listen, I understand that this is happening. I just want you to know, I'm concerned about so-and-so. I'm here for you, want to help with this. So you're identifying concerns and also being able to kind of bring it down to that more human level. Asking parents for help and ideas with the situation is another really great way to help yourself, but also to build that relationship with parents. So whether it be asking them if they know what's happening, know what those relationships look like, if it's involving people the kids know, asking if they have ideas for things that might make their child feel more comfortable, for instance, if they're the child being bullied, or if they have ideas of what could be triggering a child if they are the ones engaging in the perpetrator behaviors, things like that. Another one is staying focused on the point and the behavior itself. So this is not a time to identify that Jimmy is also missing their homework assignments or failing math, right? If there's a bullying situation going on, that takes precedence. And we want to focus on those safety concerns. And we want to make sure we're focused on the behaviors. So we want to limit any labeling of any behaviors. We're not going to say your kid's a bully, right? Or your kid's a victim even. We want to make sure we're just saying these are the behaviors that are occurring. Be careful not to make promises. This is another really big one, especially for those of us who are in schools and classrooms. We're often able to know what's happening or feel like we can really plan for things. But when it comes to bullying situations, I think it's important to recognize that we don't always have all the information. And so if in a moment when we're talking to a parent, we might have a great idea for how to handle it, be really thoughtful about making it something that is really manageable for you and that isn't going to necessarily be impacted if, say, for instance, the information you currently have turns out to be inaccurate. So just being careful not to make promises. It can be really hard to do that when we have, say, for instance, a parent who's really activated or who's really looking for answers. But just know you're okay not to have those answers and not to make those promises. Do make sure you're planning to communicate again as soon as possible. It's also a tricky one. I like, before I'm even off of that phone call, that's part of my initial to-do list, is to schedule a date for a follow-up call or meeting or something along those lines. I'd like to ask parents who the best person to contact about a situation is, what the best form of contact is. I may prefer a phone call, but there are some parents who will never answer a phone call. And so we want to be really mindful that we are meeting them where they're at potentially in these situations, and having that plan going forward is really important. and then making sure that we're documenting everything. Okay, so what I'd like everyone to do is just take a minute just to reflect. So what make some of these ideas difficult for you? Where have you struggled in the past with it, or what do you anticipate being a struggle in the future? I'd love if people can put some answers in the chat for me. Okay, so I'll just give everybody a minute to just kind of think about that, um, and then share some ideas in the chat. So what parts of this are trickiest for you, whether it be from a practical sense or an emotional sense or any of those things? So we've got a couple of responses already, and I think you're really recognizing some of those difficulties that we can have as contacting parents or having conversations with parents. So that balancing sharing information with parents timely in a timely way, while also having time to gather that evidence, it is tricky. Um, we have Sharon identifying that she likes the idea for setting an agenda for that. Um, So someone identified administrators may want to be the persons to call parents. And I think that is a really important consideration. You do want to know what your school's policies are. I've been in settings that have been very focused on administrators handling these situations, very focused on counselors, very focused on teachers. So I think it really does depend on the environment that you're in. And so you want to know what that looks like. It is hard when parents are asking for immediate consequences and answers. And we often really do want to respond. That's why it is one of the main things that I tell people. Don't feel like you have to give that, because so often that is the reaction and response that we all have, is to feel like we have to answer that question right away. And it's just not realistic in every situation. Feeling the pull to make promises. Okay. Remembering to follow up. Remembering to follow up is so hard. Managing the confidentiality of other students. That one's a big one, because we get often a lot of pushback from parents that they want to know what's happening with the other student. And again, we can't always share the information. So we want to be really mindful of that. Reluctant parents is a tricky one. Yeah. Can be difficult if a parent's adamant that the child did not do anything wrong, and being able to take the pressure off of the parents and diffuse blame. Yeah, that's always a tricky one when a parent doesn't see that. Another one where I think it's really helpful to listen to a parent and to be there and kind of help them process things and not argue with them in those moments. I don't know about you, but sometimes the first time I'm hearing information isn't always the easiest. But when I can have that opportunity to slow down, reflect, maybe down regulate a little bit, it can change my perspective on all of it. So lots of different things that we are identifying here. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts. I'll go back and look at some of those later, and feel free to continue with each other on that. What I want to discuss next is talking to parents of a bullied student, because this is one that seems to have come up a lot in the questions that individuals identified for attending the session today. So within that, there's obviously the last slide is really important in general, but some additional considerations for a situation like this would be leading with empathy. So acknowledging their child's feeling and the stress of the situation without blaming the child or the parent. I think many of us can think of situations where we have a child who's been bullied in multiple situations, and perhaps have seen adults maybe respond in a way of like, oh, yep, it's him again, or oh, it's her again, right? Or we might see some of those behaviors where we're just like, oh my gosh, please don't do that, right? And it can be really easy to place blame or judgment either on the parent or the kiddo. And we really want to be careful in those moments not to do that. um, be willing to listen. So allowing parents to share their concerns and work together to identify solutions. So this is one where I would ask everyone to sort of reflect on their own behaviors, right? It can be really easy for us to become defensive if a parent is coming at us about a bullying situation, for instance. And it can be really easy for us to be, sort of activated ourselves. But rather than thinking about how it's impacting us, really giving the opportunity to just listen. So hear them out, help them to identify, what you can do and don't understand about the situation, and then work with them to develop those solutions or potential ideas, right? So brainstorm with them. Providing reassurance, so clearly stating that how important child safety is in this situation, and then what immediate steps can be taken. This can obviously also be tricky. Like I said, if we don't have all the information, if, we're in really cursory phases of this, we may have to say, that those steps are going to be pretty limited, but we're going to want to recognize and say, that this is an area of importance. We do recognize it as essential, and trying to identify at least one little thing you can do to try to keep the child safer or help them feel safer. And the next one is developing a realistic action plan, which kind of goes along with that last one and things I was saying there. So collaborating on solutions like reassigning seats, appointing class buddies, or creating safe zones. I like to remind people we have to allow for some flexibility. So rather than saying that you're going to walk the child or make sure that there's somebody there to walk the child from class to class, for instance, maybe you're opening that up to saying that you're going to have other students identified that could potentially walk the student right from class to class if we feel like that's something. Or rather than saying he can sit in my lunch or in my class for lunch every day, for instance, well, what happens if I have a meeting that day and he can't sit in my lunch, right? And I'm not saying that's necessarily the right answer. You want to make sure that you have other options for things that can happen that are realistic and manageable, that don't require you as 100% of the resourcing on that one. The next one, though, is when we're talking about their students displaying bullying behaviors. So engaging in behaviors that we consider maybe inconsistent with the school policies and what we would like to see from students in our classroom environment. So for this one, we want to make sure we're avoiding labels, right? So focus on the behavior instead of calling the child a bully. As soon as we pull out the word bullying, we're often going to see a high level of defensive-ness from a parent, understandably so. So if instead we're focusing on the behaviors, so, it's come to my attention that, so-and-so was involved in X behavior, right? Versus your child was bullying this other student. Stick to the facts, describing the specific behavior and how it violates school policy. And not making assumptions about character or even a chronic nature of it. I worked with a colleague at one point who would take middle school or adolescent behaviors and project those into adulthood, even though we're still working with those young adolescents. And it was one of those things where when talking to parents, it really kind of set off a really bad tone for it. So we want to make sure we're just discussing what's happening in the here and now and what we know, rather than going into this predictive worry or predictive generalizations about this individual, because then you're taking things in a direction that aren't always helpful. Maintaining privacy, so don't reveal specific punishments of other children involved. Focus exclusively on their child's plan moving forward. Again, this is where we get a lot of push from parents and not liking this, but we want to make sure we are representing FERPA regulations and that we're not oversharing information. And then working with the parent to see if they have any thoughts, like is there anything going on right now that could be contributing to this? What do you see as potential contributors or causes of the behavior? And see if you can start to explore some of that together in a way of, developing that understanding and hopefully developing a plan for what could work to try to manage and improve the behaviors. The last one that I want to address really quick is the idea of, the last couple were really kind of generic in terms of whether these were in person or virtual conversations, and whether or not you were the one who was leading the conversation or the parent was. When it comes to a parent contacting us, I feel like that is where I see a lot of individuals being that much more triggered or activated. And so I'm picturing myself like sitting in my office, or a colleague sitting in their office, and a parent just calls and says, my child's been bullied. What are you going to do about it? Right. And, immediate, like, flush of emotion, right? So we want to make sure we're taking parents' concerns seriously in these situations, not writing them off. Again, really looking to try to manage and identify where we are with our emotions in the situation, being supportive, but recognize in those situations there's a lot more information that's going to be needed probably to make decisions, right? So if we have a parent contacting us, it's the first time we're hearing about a bullying situation, we may not be getting the full story, right? And so we want to make sure that we are not responding to that in a way as if it is the full story and all the facts, and that we're answering all the questions in that moment. Because it is okay not to have all the answers or recognize that you don't have all the information. So, with all that in mind, what I would like to do is first take a minute for the chat and see if we have any questions that people want to identify, or any thoughts on any of those. And while you're doing that, I would love to see if anyone is willing to be our volunteer to engage in a role play activity with me. So, for this, I'm going to ask someone to participate as a parent, letting me know that your child's being bullied by someone in my class. If we could just focus on something happening in my class, we'll pretend I'm a classroom teacher. You're going to be very worried and upset, and we're going to have a conversation about the situation. I see Jake raised his hand, so I appreciate that, Jake. Marie, I might just need you to unmute him if he's not able to unmute himself. And what we're going to do with this, Jake, is I have a couple points that I do want to make sure you make. So one is I want you to identify, again, that there's a situation happening. I want you to share some specific concerns or incidents that your child has shared with you. I want you to ask me some questions like, what's being done to stop this from happening again? How are you punishing the bully? I do want you to express your emotions in this. It is okay to share that you're upset in this moment. Totally get that. We'll deal with that because that's what potentially you might have to deal with as a practitioner. And then when we're all done, we're going to debrief the conversation. So, Jake, are you able to turn your camera on?
Yeah.
You don't have to.
No, just
Okay.
kidding.
You're not able to.
No, it won't let me.
I won't let you. Okay.
No, sorry.
Well, no, you're okay.
You should
We'll
be
just
able to, you should be able to now. I just turned it on.
Oh, there we go.
okay.
Okay.
Hi, Jake. Okay. So
Hi.
just really responding to the chat also, Heather, I see that you have no camera or microphone. Nobody else needs to participate in this part. You can always debrief afterwards through the chat if you want to, but no worries if you don't have camera or microphone. We've got Jake here willing to be our volunteer, so I appreciate that. Okay, so Jake, I'll just answer the phone as if I'm in my classroom. And do you have any questions about what your role is in this?
I got it.
Okay. Hi, this is Dr. Torchia.
Hi, Dr. Torchia. I just wanted to call today because my child came home today very upset and told me that they were being bullied in your classroom, and I just really want to get to the bottom of it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for calling me. I'm so sorry to hear that this is happening. Can you just tell me which child is yours? What's the name of your child?
Allie.
Allie. Okay.
So,
Oh, I'm
yeah,
so sorry to
Allie,
hear that.
go ahead.
I'm so sorry to hear that that this is happening to Allie. Are you able to give me some information about what's going on?
Yeah, so Ellie has been telling me that she's when she goes to your class, she'll get like pushed when she's coming into the classroom. And when she goes to her seat, girls are making nasty comments under their breath at her. She won't tell me the specifics, and she said she tried to talk to you about it, and nothing has gotten done. So I'm really kind of upset about that because I know you're a good teacher, but I don't understand why nothing's happening, and like what's being done with these other students that are saying these things. And there's a couple of them, like it's a group of 3 or 4 girls. I don't know their names, but she said that they always hang out with each other and like everyone knows who they are.
Okay, I'm so sorry. So, real, do you know which girls she's referencing here, or which girls are involved? It's okay if you don't.
I don't. I want to say one of them name is Leah.
Okay. Okay. Did Allie mention how long this has been going on?
She said it's been about like a month or two that it's been going on.
A month or two. Okay. Oh, wow. That's a really long time. I mean, I do have to say, I appreciate the fact that she was able to come to you with this and have the conversation with you. It really says a lot about your relationship with her that she felt comfortable and safe enough to say something. And I absolutely want to get down to the bottom of this because I don't want her feeling unsafe at school and especially in my classroom, but just in school in general. I want it to be a space where she feels comfortable. Um, and the fact that that's not the case right now is obviously a big concern for me. So, is there any additional information you have about the situation at this point?
Um, no, I know she used to be friends with Leah, and that they used to like tease. They had some falling out, but I'm not really sure. And then the comments started like a month or two ago, and then it just got physical this past week, which is why I wanted to call because like, when it gets physical, I feel like it like not that it wasn't important before, but it seems like it's escalating quickly, and I just think that's
Yeah.
concerning.
Yeah, that does sound like an escalation that we definitely don't want to see. And I mean, I know like in the past, her and Leah have seemed fine together. So, unfortunately, the relationships do change a bit, and sometimes it's hard to keep track of. But I'm wondering, obviously for the sake of my classroom in particular, and I think Leah's locker is right near Allie's. So I'm just trying to think of some things offhand that we might be able to do to try to make Leah feel more comfortable, right off the bat. I do change my class seating pretty often, so it's not something where students would be like red flagged if I did it. Do you know if there are students in our class, like she's got some safe people in there that if I had her sitting next to them, maybe she would feel more comfortable?
I know there's this girl Beth in her class that she said that she's been really nice and really helpful ever since all this has gone down. Like ever since she's gotten like isolated by the other girls, and she's just been really great. I don't really know much about her, but I know she's been really helpful.
Okay. So maybe what I'll try to do is make sure Beth is sitting near her so she at least has like a comfort person while we try to get to the bottom of all of this and try to figure out what's going on. I'm also wondering if it's a possibility to have for me to have a conversation with Allie either maybe before school tomorrow so I can get a better understanding of it.
Yeah, that would be great. Um, Something I did want to ask, 'cause I know I kind of asked earlier, we
Mhm.
haven't really talked about it yet. What are we going to do to like punish the 4 girls? And like, what is that going to look like? Are their parents going to be involved? And like you said, they're close lockers, and I know like getting that moved isn't always really easy, but like I don't really feel comfortable having her near Leah or any of the
Yeah.
other girls for that matter, because I think the other girls are just down the hall. And I kind of want that done like as soon as possible. Like, what is that going to look like?
Yeah, and I absolutely appreciate that. I feel like I would feel the same way as you're feeling right now, wanting the answers right now. I'm going to be honest, I don't necessarily have any specific answers about, say, like lockers or things like that at this point, or where the other girls' lockers are, or even punishments. I've got to make sure that I'm really looking into this. My concern is always I don't want to just have like a stopgap in place and I don't want to just do something to react. I want to make sure that we're being really thoughtful about this because relationships at this age can be so tricky. And the last thing I want to do is make things worse for anyone. So I know you want answers and I want to be able to give them to you. But if it's, if you can just kind of of hang in there with me. And, maybe we can also touch base and try to come up with some ideas for things that will, again, be beneficial in the current, but also in more of like a long-term situation. I'd like to have some conversations with the individuals involved, with other staff members also to see if they're noticing anything. So I feel like I guess Allie coming to you, and then you coming to me is such a great start. And I'm so grateful for it. And I want to give you all the answers, but I don't want to give you the wrong answers or things I can't follow through on. So I hope you can understand that.
I do. What happens if it gets worse though in the meantime? Because that sounds like it's a long process of talking to teachers and talking to students. And I understand you have to do your due diligence, but
Yeah.
it's getting physical. And if she gets hurt, like what does that look like? Like I don't want to be nasty because I know you're trying to accommodate and this has been really great, but I just don't want like she's my kid, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, the physical safety stuff is, I mean, in many ways, just as important to me as the emotional safety for her, right? But I guess when I say I want to do my due diligence, my hope is that I hope to follow through on some of the investigations and have some ideas really quickly. It's a priority at this point. Her safety is obviously a priority. And so I guess I'm making it sound like it's going to take months and months and months, and maybe the totality of the situation is going to. But yeah, we do need to make sure that she is physically safe right away. Couple things that I'm thinking, I've had students who maybe aren't using their locker for a little bit, and they do just store their stuff in my classroom for a little while, and my classroom's always unlocked, so that's not a big deal for them to be able to get in and out as they need to, and it's not adding a ton of time onto her day because her locker is usually right outside of my classroom. So that is something that I'm kind of possibly going to do, or maybe we can talk to her and see if that would be helpful. But yeah, I don't want the physical to continue, absolutely. But I also don't want the emotional to continue. So I do hope to work pretty quickly on this, but just want to have some realistic expectations that the full story is probably not going to be readily available tomorrow morning when you guys come in.
Okay.
Does that make
I
sense?
appreciate that honesty.
Yeah.
Yes.
I appreciate you. I really do. I know that so many times it's so, it's always a debate as a parent. Like, do I take this seriously? Do I go to the teacher? Like, what do I do? So I do want to thank you for letting me know. And I'm glad that I'll be able to talk to Allie in the morning and have that conversation.
Me
Okay,
too. Yeah.
good. Is there something else you wanted to include? Sorry.
I was gonna throw in like a cyberbullying thing too.
You're just good. You're going to take it over. Well, for the sake of timing, we'll end it right there.
Okay.
But obviously, if a parent, then we would try to have that conversation. But thank you. Good job, Jake. You did a fantastic job. I appreciate you.
Appreciate
So
you.
I'd love to get some takeaways, have some debriefs from folks in terms of thoughts that they might have. It seems like microphones might be muted. So maybe if we do that in the chat as well, that would be good. Jake, did you have any thoughts on it?
No, I thought you did a really good job. You were really great.
I thought you did a great job too, Jake. Okay, so I'll just wait for folks to put some comments in the chat. Beth, comment from Beth Botzer. It was the nicest parent ever, and I wish all parents were so reasonable. Yes. I will say though, I do think that a lot of times if you come at it in a particular way, it can really take things down a notch or two. So I am hopeful that that would be the case. I loved your response when it came to not having all the information yet and not reacting too quickly, which might make things worse instead of better. Yeah, I tend to be very upfront with what's happening. Because I do feel like otherwise when we are like withholding information or not sharing things, people can get the sense that we are withholding, that we're not trustworthy. So by saying like, this is a consideration of mine, I think is helpful. Wait, I missed that one more. So somebody asked, what about how Jake mentioned that Ellie already came to you, but nothing happened when she did? So I think that, obviously this is a role play activity. So it's hard for me to say in that moment, like, thinking to myself, yes, she did. No, she didn't. Right. Like, cause it's made up. So we don't know. And in real life, I think that will be something that you're going to have to address. So in some cases, I've had a parent say that a child told me and the child didn't tell me, right? But I don't want to get that child in trouble. Like they felt like they had indicated it in some way. So in that case, I may try to just overlook it the way I did in that situation. Or if I did know about the situation and I did do something to address it, I may say something along the lines of, I'm so sorry to hear this is happening still. For instance, we tried to address it previously, and it's upsetting to hear that this is still taking place, for instance. But there's always going to be things that are going to be dropped potentially, as in this profession there's so many things that need 100% of your attention that there's just no way to do it. And so having some accountability and some recognition, like, wow, I apologize if that's that's the case, and I do wish I had handled it differently, or something along those lines, can sometimes be really helpful. I like that you were giving different options that can be done in the meantime. Yeah. What actionable steps can be taken? Validating the parent is important. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Great. So I appreciate those comments. So a couple other things that I would just like to point out. Sorry. Sorry, guys. I have so many windows open right now. Okay. So we talked about that. Okay, so a couple key takeaways that I just want to bring up, have some further comments about. It's the idea of subjectivity, right? So when we are coming at a conversation about bullying, we have to know that there is going to be some subjectivity involved here, right? Like, our understanding of bullying is going to be personal. It's often emotional, sometimes for the parents, sometimes for us as the adults, right? And it's really important that we just acknowledge that. How we interpret the situation or any sort of a behavior is going to be based on our own experiences, how it's been conceptualized. I have 2 kids, and I always recognize, I try to recognize in those moments that when they're super heated about the way they've been treated by someone else, that may or may not be the same reality that the other person is experiencing, right? And so we want to make sure that we are really thoughtful about having some flexibility in our thinking and having room for additional information to kind of come in. So problem solving, every allegation should be viewed as a red flag, indicating a problem that requires a solution, right? So we have a child who's feeling unsafe at school. We want to make sure we address that, right? Whether or not we, say, for instance, agree with that being a bully situation, right? Or whether or not we think they're overreacting or something along those lines. This is an individual who is concerned and scared, and we want to make sure we're taking it seriously. And then the last one I have here is focus. So rather than debating whether or not it meets the definition, we want to make sure that we are ensuring safety for everyone, no matter what. There's one thing that Jake didn't ask that I feel like I get a lot of, and that is the question of how is it that you didn't know? Like, this is your classroom. How could you not know that this was happening? Or like, this is your, whatever the situation is. How could you not know it was happening? And for that one, sorry, give me a second. Here we go. For that question, I always, I'm very open and I'm like, honestly, that is a question that I ask myself. Like, when I worked in the schools, I would be like, that's a question I ask myself all the time, right? Like, how can I grow more eyes? How can I grow more arms? How can I have more hours in a day to attend to each individual child's needs? Like, I ask myself that question all the time. How did I miss this? And honestly, I really try to work on it every day, trying to be more open and trying to be more aware. If, you coming to me as a parent and letting me know the situation is one way that I get better at that, right? Because it teaches me, like, okay, maybe that entry into my classroom needs to be better organized, right? But, or there's some particular things that haven't been an issue in years past, but they are this year. And so while I wish I could say I know everything going on in my classroom, I know that that's not always the case. And so I do apologize for that, but I'm working on it every day kind of thing. So I do feel like having that sense of humility and that acknowledgement is important. And again, I feel like a lot of parents don't feel like they can do that, or teachers don't feel like they can do that, excuse me, because they're like giving something up or some sort of power up in some cases. But I do think that it is a way of building the relationship and an opportunity to build that collaboration and that school climate and safety component of things. So thank you, Jake. I really appreciate your thoughts on that one and your participation there. So helpful. Let me just get back to this. Okay. So just a couple things, a lot of questions came up about managing defensiveness from parents, and there's a lot of different models for de-escalation. I decided to use one from our Motivational Interviewing Institute at the University of Buffalo because it felt like, good connection there. But so for instance, when we see that tension is escalating, so we see a parent who is incredibly upset about a situation involving their child, whether it be that their child has engaged in behaviors consistent with what we might consider bullying or who's been the victim of those. Considering focusing on open-ended questions. So inviting the parent's perspective before problem solving. So oftentimes we can really de-escalate a situation by inviting the parent to share their thoughts. And that can be a huge component for building that relationship, as I mentioned. Affirmations, so acknowledging their concerns and their care for their child. In the conversation with Jake, I thanked the teacher for letting me know, because in this day and age, we should actually be pretty grateful that they're coming to us, because so many times parents will go to social media, for instance, or to other parents and not give us the opportunity to address the situation. And so when we have the opportunity to be able to deal with it head on instead of sort of this mass sort of public, public trial, essentially, I think that can be really helpful. So recognizing that is important. So also reflective listening. So mirroring back what you're hearing before you're responding to the content. I had a colleague who I worked with who, as I'm sitting there having any conversation with him, I'm literally watching him develop his argument against me, right? And so remembering that conversations and these conversations work best when our goal is a shared understanding, even if we may not be feeling that the parent has that same goal. For us, recognizing how important it is to hear what the parent has to say is essential. Because if we're just working on how we're going to defend ourselves in that moment, we're going to miss a lot of information and we're going to miss a lot of opportunities to develop those relationships. Summarize, so close with a clear statement of what was agreed upon. Obviously, for time's sake, we kind of cut that one off, but usually I will have like a restatement and reinforce the idea that we're having that meeting, and then even having a conversation at that point about when the follow-up phone call or, whatever format of communication would take place would be. And just some additional things. So making sure we're matching any sort of resistance or any sort of emotionality with curiosity. Don't defend yourself. You are in a really tough role in schools. There are a lot of kind of moving parts, things that you're trying to address. And it is hard for a parent who has never worked in a school to understand some of those things. So try not to be defensive about it. It is not necessarily always, coming from a place of like, we want to get you right. Like it's a matter of, we don't necessarily understand. And so trying to approach so that you understand and then help them understand. Referring to documented evidence and consistent school policies when challenged. So hopefully, precursor to all of this is that you have a solid bullying prevention program in your school that you can reference. That's a whole different colloquium meeting or series. Remember that it is appropriate to pause or reschedule a conversation if it becomes unproductive. If we've got a parent who's super escalated in that moment, kind of identifying, it sounds like, this conversation is really difficult right now. I want to make sure that we can make it as productive as possible. Can we reschedule this and set this up for another date, time? Kind of identifying what you think would be helpful in that situation to make it more productive, whether it be bringing in administration or school psych, whoever, sometimes SROs, things like that. So don't be afraid to pause or reschedule, and make sure you're documenting, right? So making sure you're keeping track of any key points of those parent contacts, including if there's a particular tone or concern that you have, and then what those next steps are, and making sure that whoever is involved in those next steps are aware of it. The last thing I just want to cover really quickly, which just feels bad covering this quickly at all, is the idea of bias in conversations about bullying. And I'm saying this not to make people feel bad or defensive, but we know that our brains love a shortcut, right? We also know that each of us comes from a different space, a different framework, a different culture, right? Cultural experience or socioeconomic status. Like, so many things are happening to us on a given day that are going to influence how we perceive a particular situation and our biases. And so I just really want to point out how important, when it comes to conversations about bullying, that is to recognize, because we know that that it can work in a couple different ways, right? So bias can affect whether or not we as teachers are recognizing bullying in the first place, right? So if we're looking at a situation, and I've had students identify that they're being called bullies when they feel like the behavior is not bullying, and their friend group, for instance, identifies it as not bullying. But I've also had it where students are identifying bullying and the teachers are like, oh my gosh, that's not what that is, right? And so sometimes those can be based on our biases, whether it be related to things like, race, sexuality, gender, socioeconomic status, right? So many different factors. So we want to be thoughtful about that. It's going to affect whose parents we call, how we contact them, and how we approach that phone call. So we want to be really thoughtful about that. Our biases can also affect whether or not we feel we can address the situation well. So, for instance, there's a lot of research that indicates that when it's, say, for instance, marginalized groups, or when there's race or sexuality considerations, we as educators might feel particularly untrained in terms of managing and dealing with these situations. And oftentimes that's going to come across in those phone calls and enhance feelings of lack of security and safety by parents. So we really want to think about those types of things. And then the bias that we bring to the parents ourselves, right? So those implicit associations we make about parent credibility, about their engagement, about their intent, and those are going to be shaped by, all these different factors as well. So I bring this up because not to just admire the problem, but to give you guys some thoughts about how to manage these. So I like to do a self-check before I have some of these difficult conversations. And one of those inclusions that you can have, for instance, is asking yourself some questions before you reach out to a parent, or before you identify, say, for instance, a behavior as bullying. So if it's about the student, so would I consider this behavior serious enough if a different student were targeted? Like, would I see it differently if we kind of had different actors or different representatives in the different roles in this? Would I frame the situation differently if the child's identity were different, right? And then for the parent, am I extending the same presumption of good faith I would to any family? Or does my response reflect the situation itself or my assumptions about this parent? And those are just some key questions, again, not to make people feel bad, not to give us one more thing to think about in a very cognitively taxing job, but to help us to recognize that these are going to be things, these biases are present for all of us, and understanding that we can develop this awareness and hopefully improve our ability to manage these situations and our own self-awareness when it comes to all of this. So I just wanted to say that also really quick before we finish up here. So just overall, I want everyone to remember that conversations about bullying aren't about who's right or wrong. They're about creating a safe and secure learning environment. And if we can reflect on that when we're working with parents, taking that level, that approach can often decrease defensiveness and create a more collaborative environment. So I do have a number of resources here that we share from the Alberti Center. So obviously, I'm assuming if you're here today, it's because you are already I guess, following the Alberti Center on lots of social media, or you just happened upon our website. But we do have lots of social media presence that you can join us. There's also some other great resources. So just know when these situations come up, you do not have to deal with them alone. There are lots of resources out there, so you're not kind of making things up or starting things afresh. And you don't have to be the expert all the time. You can go to some of these resources and utilize those. And of course, at the Alberti Center as well. So I finished right on time, and I'm not going to lie, I'm super impressed about that. So what I want to do is kind of open things up. Amanda is going to address some questions that people had identified, and I'm happy to try to answer those for you.
Great. Yeah, this was such a wonderful and helpful presentation. Loved the role play. I think if all the interactions went like that, the world would be a better place. We did have a number of questions, so I think I'll start off with at what point is it better to have parents, guardians come in for an in-person conversation rather than communicating over the phone?
So I think that one came up from actually a few people, and I think it's not a definitive answer. That's why, having a slide on that was going to be a little bit tricky. So a couple factors I think you want to really keep in mind. One is accessibility, right? So depending on what climate we're working in, depending on who we're trying to get in touch with, some parents are not going to be able to come in person. In general, I tend to be prefer in-person meetings versus phone calls. But at the same time, if a parent is not going to be accessible for that, then I'm not going to impose that on them because it's just not realistic, right? When it comes to phone calls, I do think that obviously increases some accessibility for a lot of people. I also think sometimes when you have a parent who's particularly hostile, sometimes it can be helpful to have some space and separation there in some of those cases. I've also seen situations where we have those hostile parents where if we have the right resources within the school, those can sometimes be de-escalated better in an in-person format. So I think that's when it really helps to know your school community, to know who you're working with. I generally do prefer in person if possible, but it's just not always realistic.
Great, thank you. You've definitely touched on this a little bit, but the question was, how do you handle feelings of frustration or distrust from parents who may have brought up issues of bullying with other schools or professionals and felt unheard or like there hasn't been enough done?
So yeah, obviously, that came up in the chat earlier. So I think it's just important to recognize and empathize with the parent, right? And to try to reflect on kind of can't go back essentially. So really trying to focus on what can we do in this moment moving forward rather than focusing on the past. I do think though it can be helpful to ask the parent, you mentioned that you've had this conversation before or that you've had these issues before. Do you mind me asking some specifics about that? What maybe happened, what was or was not done about the situation so that we can get a sense of what their perspective was, and maybe look at it in some different ways. Because we just don't always know, especially if we weren't involved in it. So I think gathering some information, having some empathy for them with it, can be really helpful. If it's a matter of a parent who's just constantly kind of digging up like the past, essentially, then I think it's less of a focus on help me understand what you feel, what happened in the past. And so we can try to avoid some of those pitfalls in the future. And instead, maybe we're like, I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm here with you now. Let's, see what we can do to make this situation better.
Great. How do you handle a student who lies about a situation to their parent, like a student who repeatedly targets other students but claims that students are targeting him when this has never been, observed?
Those are always so tricky. So again, there's a couple of factors here. One, not all humans have a ton of insight into their behaviors and how their behaviors are affecting others. So I try not to look at it as if that individual is lying, and instead look at it as maybe it's a lack of awareness or a lack of insight for them. So I try to take a step back, because I think when it is approached as this kid's lying, then I think that can kind of activate a lot of other things. The other thing is, why, if we're like, no, he definitely knows, right? We've talked about this. Then why isn't that person kind of acknowledging what they did and trying to understand, right? Do they have a particularly punitive parent, for instance? And if they were to say that, they'd get in serious trouble, or if they've been involved in situations like this before and they're kind of like on a last strike system before they have like a more severe consequence kind of thing. So I think in those situations, one kind of, again, like de-escalating myself in it, in terms of thinking like, all right, these are kids, teenagers, right? We're experimenting with so many different aspects of our personalities and trying out so many different behaviors, that some of them work out and some of them don't work out. So trying to give some recognition of that, and then really working with a parent in that situation to explain, okay, so, I understand that he's not, or she's not feeling like this was, or not identifying with these behaviors, but this is what was seen, essentially. So that's when it's helpful to have a lot of evidence, to be able to, kind of have that confidence in yourself or in the information that you have at that point to say, well, these are the behaviors that were identified and that were a concern.
Excellent. Before I get into the next question, which is a little bit related, I do want to just point out to people that Bree has put in the chat the link to the evaluation for today. So if you could take a couple minutes to complete that, and that's also where you'll get your certificate of completion. But please stay on, because we have a couple other great questions, and I know Toni will have excellent responses. So a little bit related, but from the parent aspect, and I do believe you touched on this as well, but how do you respond when a parent refuses to believe their child may be contributing to the problem?
Yeah. So this is obviously trickier. And I think one of those times when you have some of the highest levels of emotionality from a parent in many cases, right? So we go into like protective mode, for instance. And I think that, again, is when you're going to really focus back on like the data, essentially, the specific behaviors that you have. And if a parent is truly, disbelieving, being able to focus that would be really important. Um, it is tough, though. It is tough because I've run into those situations where a parent does not see their child as being able to engage in these behaviors. And so having those facts and having that data is really important. Another thing that I will identify for parents sometimes is, I understand that these peer relationships are really tricky or confusing at times. And so, I know that I've engaged with people at times and felt like my behavior was perfectly fine or funny or whatever. And it wasn't received that way by other people. And so recognizing that sometimes a behavior, is not landing well with someone else, and really, instead of focusing on your kid and whether or not they did it, I want you to, understand that this other child experienced it in this way. So can we find a different way of approaching things, or can we find a different way of addressing things? Because it's not just that your child is comfortable with what they did, it's how their behavior impacted someone else.
Very helpful. This question takes us more in the prevention realm. What are your ideas about how we can better integrate parents into bullying prevention efforts?
Okay. So for that one, I think it's tricky. I think obviously it starts way at the it starts at the beginning of schooling and it starts at the beginning of the school year, essentially. So I've seen some schools who actually require parents to come in, and anytime there's like a building change, and they require parents to come in for an open house, almost like an introduction, the way we have our students do maybe beginning of the year assemblies and things like that. Giving parents a voice in the bullying prevention efforts, having them understand and acknowledge those things is also really important, and being creative about how you do those things, right? I know Amanda, Stephanie, like we've all tried to do parent programming in the evenings and had often terrible responses to it, right? Sometimes good, but often really it's been a struggle to get parents to come in. So figuring out what works for parents in your community, right? So if they're looking for something midday, or if you can have trainings that they can do at any point, essentially, versus, like an asynchronous virtual training or introduction to school policies and procedures would be really helpful. Setting up things that are actually fun for students and for parents to be involved in, so it doesn't feel punitive, is also great. Involving food, incorporating it in with another event that parents would already be there for, I think is also really helpful. So if, for instance, we have a lot of parents coming in for open house, maybe we set aside the first like half hour of the open house to go over some of these things for parents, so that, then they can meet with teachers after that. Or even better, if we have something like a school concert, and we start off the concert with whatever training or introductions, but giving parents opportunities to try to make it as easy as possible for them to participate and be involved in these situations.
Wonderful. And this is also, I believe, something that you addressed early on, but you might want to add. The question is, how do you get administrators on board in understanding that bullying is not a rite of passage and that it actually damages children's and adults' confidence levels throughout life?
Yeah, and I think this is where it's really important that we reflect on, what policies and procedures are in place. So chances are your school has a policy on bullying, right? We know that we have requirements towards that, and maybe reflecting on that with administrators can be really helpful. And if, for instance, you have a lot of pushback for one administrator, maybe we're working with one of the other administrators in the building to try to address situations like this. But really reflecting on the fact that this isn't your traditional, just like this kid was mean or they're arguing about something. Like, this is truly hitting the status of a bullying situation. And, as a result, we really need to take this seriously. So having that recognition that there is a difference in those behaviors, and what is traditional and maybe more expected. And, we want to actually really teach kids how to deal with them because they're going to see it forever, versus bullying situations, which are not the case.
Wonderful. So those were a lot of pretty tough questions about tough situations, and as always, you handled them beautifully. And I'm sure everybody can see why we couldn't let Toni go when she graduated. So I'm so glad that she's continued to partner with us and be such an important part of the center. We do have a couple more minutes if anybody had any other questions or comments. I'm not seeing others in the chat. So we can certainly give you back a couple more minutes in your day. But I would just like to thank everyone again for coming, and especially to Toni for a wonderful presentation. This is the last one of this academic year, so please, if you haven't already, join our mailing list, social media. It's all on the front page of our website, and have a look out for our events coming up next year.
Thank you.